Hey there and welcome to Concierge Medicine Radio, your source for actionable advice and real stories of physicians running and growing concierge practices. For more interviews and notes on today's show, please visit conciergemedicineradio.com and enter your email. Now, let's join your host, Taylor Pearson.
Hey there, welcome to today's episode of Concierge Medicine Radio. We're joined today by Dr. Matt Priddy of Priority Physicians PC over in Indianapolis. Dr. Priddy is the current president of the American Academy of Private Physicians. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Priddy.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your practice at Priority Physicians.
Well, I have been practicing in private medicine in Indianapolis for 12 years now. My partner, Dr. Craig Veach, and I helped start Priority Physicians back in 2002. And we are probably fairly unique insofar as we started with one patient and have built up our practice from that to we have about 820 patients now and 5 physicians in our practice. We are strictly a retainer-based practice, so we do not bill insurance, we do not bill Medicare, and our patients pay us a once-a-year annual fee for all of their primary care needs, including house calls, ER visits. We meet our own patients in the ER. We do take care of our own patients in the hospital, so it's very much a full-service private medicine practice.
Does that include labs and medications, or do you help people file for insurance outside of that?
Right. So our patients, we very strongly encourage them to have insurance, and that is correct. Their medications, if their insurance cover that, would be included under that. We do not provide medications at our practice. We obviously have a small sample drug closet, and we have some basic meds, prednisone, Keflex, things like that we'll just give out to our patients on an as-needed basis for acute events. But when it comes to, scheduled medications our patients are on, that would be traditional run through their insurance as well. The same thing would go for labs. Their annual labs and their follow-up labs are all ordered out of our practice, but are sent to an outside lab that bills their insurance for those.
Okay, and what's the annual fee to be a member?
Well, the annual fee depends on the age of the patient. We have 4 tiers of annual membership fee. Children 0 to 24 are $1,400 a year. 25 to 34 is $2,800 a year. Our standard adult membership up to age 69 is $5,500 a year, and then anyone 70 and over is $7,500 a year. We instituted that graduated pay scale simply because we found that as patients get older, they tend to utilize our services more. So,
sure. Pretty much everyone I've talked to that's doing a retainer-based model has a similar, some sort of scale that falls generally along those guidelines that as patients get older, they have a different tiering of how they handle it.
Yeah, and the other thing that we find, not necessarily with our patients who are 70, but certainly with our patients as they get into their 80s and 90s, is we end up doing a lot more house calls on those patients. It's more difficult for them to get out. In addition, we have many patients that are in assisted living facilities, and we'll stop by and see them once a month there and coordinate their health care through their assisted living facility. So it's a big benefit to those patients, but the level of utilization certainly tends to go up when you're in a situation like that.
Well, walk us through what a typical day looks like for you. Then you spend a lot of time in house calls. You said going to the emergency room. Do you have 24/7 access with a phone and email, or how does that kind of shape up?
Again, there are 5 of us right now, and so we take call a week at a time. And during that week of call, we are we use our cell phones as our pagers. We have a paging service that goes through our cell phones. But yeah, we're on 24/7 for that week. To be quite honest with you, ER visits are fairly rare. Well, yeah, I might do one a month. Most of the time, unless it's a true emergency, we can deal with 90% of the things that people would typically go to an ER for on an outpatient basis. So I'm thinking of dehydration. We can give people IV fluids in our office. Pretty much any manner of laceration that doesn't require surgery, we can fix in our office. All the way through, sore throats, migraine headaches, all those things we can take care of in our office. We found one of the things that really has been a huge driver for people going to the ER in recent years has just been the unavailability of their primary care doc. So they're sick and it's a Saturday night and they call their primary care doc and they're sent to the ER. On the weekends or nights, unless somebody truly is having an emergency, our answer is either we'll meet you at your house or we'll meet you here in our office and we'll open it up and we'll get you taken care of. A typical day for us, I'm here in the office by 7:30 in the morning and I leave most days by 5 or 5:30. Most of my mornings are taken up by an executive physical, which is the comprehensive annual exam that we do on our patients. Try and do one per patient per year, and that takes between 2 to 4 hours, depending on who the patient is and how many medical issues they have. In patients over 40, that would include a treadmill every year. Depending on their risk factors, that may or may not include a coronary calcium score along with a screening lung CT scan. We're attached to the hospital, so we walk our patients down for those tests and walk them back up. Once the annual exam is done, the rest of the day is either for scheduled follow-up visits or for sick visits for our patients.
Well, take us back a little bit then and maybe give us a better idea of what a day looked like in 2002, because you kind of were ahead of the curve here. There weren't a lot of people doing this in 2002. How did you get into it kind of that early on? And then what was it actually like building and growing it from one patient up?
You're right. I mean, back in 2002, it was very different. I actually came right out of residency and started doing this. It was kind of boring certain days anyways. We would have days when we only had 20 patients. There were days where we didn't see a single person in the office. Boring and a little, nerve-wracking at the same time, because certainly wanted to be more busy and I was worried about, making ends meet. One of the things that I think made it easier is that I had just been a resident, so I was used to not making any money. So I didn't have, I didn't have that as a concern. And I know that that's something that
your lifestyle baseline was already quite low.
Right. Yeah. I was used to living on $35,000 a year, so I was okay. So I think that was just turned out through luck to be sort of a good time to do it. I remember going into this thinking, well, if it works, that will be great. And if it doesn't, I'm sure I can get a job, a year from now as just a regular primary care physician, in a hospital system. And I'm sure I could have. Fortunately for me, it did work out. One of the things that I think that really helped us when we started and had fewer patients is we were really able to just go crazily above and beyond the call of duty for our patients. And not that we don't do that now, but in the beginning, one of the believe it or not, it was long enough ago that the internet wasn't nearly what it is now, and most of our patients came to us through word of mouth and referrals that way. Being able to overserve our patients was a huge benefit to us from a recruiting standpoint. Word of mouth is still the number one way that we get patients, but we probably get 30 to 40% of our patients now via internet inquiries and people that know about private medicine and will look up private medicine in Indianapolis and will find our website. And many times when they come to us, they've read through the whole thing and they have a very, very good idea of what they're looking for and what we do. 12 years ago, people hadn't heard of this. They didn't know who we were, what we were doing. They'd never heard of anything like this. So it was a let's put it this way, it was a much harder sell 12 years ago than it is now.
And so you built the practice up basically by under-promising, over-delivering for your initial patients, and then word of mouth referrals, it just organically grew.
Right. I think that in my role in the AAPP, one of the things that I always warn new physicians against is the tendency to overpromise what you're going to do in the beginning, and then as you get busier, you start to underdeliver on that promise. I would love to say that we didn't do that. We promised our patients the moon, but because we limited our ratio to 200 patients per physician, we've been able to maintain that level of service from the very get-go and continue to maintain it to this day. One of the things that I always caution physicians against is, decide what you want to provide your patients, decide what price point you want to set, and then decide how many patients, would be full for you on your level of service. Is it 200 patients? Is it 600 patients? Is it 1,200 patients? And that's very important to set out in the very beginning, because if your price point is set at such that you need 1,200 patients to be full, you need to be very careful in the beginning that you don't start saying, well, I'll just come over to your house and do that, or, I'll see you in the hospital. Your patients will love you for it. But once you start to get full, you're going to have to stop doing that. That will be something that you will start to hear things like, oh, Dr. Priddy used to do this, but he doesn't do it anymore, and it's just not the way it used to be. And that is not the type of word of mouth that you want in order to grow your practice.
Yeah, you're setting false expectations.
Exactly. Oh, well, yeah, it's not even false expectations. I mean, they're expectations that you used to meet.
Yeah.
And now you're not. I mean,
unrealistic expectations. Yeah.
Unrealistic expectations moving forward. Yeah. And that's a huge problem. That's something that every doctor wants to their patients to be as happy and healthy as they possibly can be. And it's very difficult in the beginning because you are trying to grow the practice to try and, there's a very big temptation to overpromise and to overdeliver, and then when you get busier, not be able to do that. And like I said, I wish I could tell you that this was some part of some grand plan, but I think that in setting our price point on the higher end of private medicine practices and in keeping our doctor-to-patient ratio very low, we were able to basically never put ourselves in a situation where somebody could say, well, back in 2002 they did X, but now they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, and I thought that formula you gave was particularly good of setting the services and then what's the number of patients where I can provide that service. Yeah. So, and it sounded like for y'all it was 200 and that was a hard cap.
Yeah, it is, and we always overhire to make sure we never go past that. So again, right now we have 5 doctors and we're at 820 patients. And long before we get to 1,000 patients, we will have a plan for another office and another physician. As long as we're kind of talking about business planning and expectations that physicians set, there are a lot of different models around the country, but if you look at them, the numbers behind them are strikingly similar. So you take an MD-VIP practice, for example, and they charge anywhere between $1,300 to up to $2,000 per patient per year. And they cap their patients at 600 patients per doctor. So it's 3 times as many patients per doctor and about a third of the price of what we do. Furthermore, you look at the common direct primary care practices around the country, your Access Health Rhode Island, your Q-Liance up in Seattle, and they will set their limit at about 1,200 patients per doctor, and they charge about $600 a year. Nobody's getting rich off this, and nobody's really making any more money than anybody else. It's just you need to decide, what kind of service, what level of service you want to provide, how many patients you want to provide it for, and your price point really then kind of shakes out once you make those first 2 decisions.
What was kind of the timeline for one patient to a full practice was it you and your partner initially or just you?
I started off as the full-time physician. I was cheap because I was just out of residency, and my partner had been out of residency for 4 years, so he was on faculty at the hospital the campus that we're located on. So he was working part-time for the hospital and then part-time over here, and he did that for a good 3 years until we were busy enough that he could come over and work full-time. So it was about 3 years for us to get up to, say, 300, 350 patients. It has grown slowly since then. I mean, I wish I could say it was linear, but it wasn't. We really grew like gangbusters through about 2007. The recession hit, and we still grew, but it really slowed down considerably in 2008, 2009, 2010. And then once the economy started to pick back up again, and I think also once people started to think more and more about healthcare with the discussions around the Affordable Care Act, a lot more just uncertainty in the healthcare markets, people hearing about it all the time. Certainly recently with, more people being insured, but not necessarily more primary care doctors out there to see them, more and more folks are concerned about, making sure that they have access to good primary care and aren't going to be pushed off onto, an ancillary provider, a nurse, or something like that. So we have seen sort of a bimodal spike. In the beginning, obviously it was very slow, and then things sort of picked up, slowed down during the recession, and then the last 2 years we've had the best 2 years we've ever had, and we're growing at about 25% a year the last 2 years running.
And in terms of the patients coming in, the profile I hear most concierge physicians reference are baby boomers, particularly baby boomers with multiple chronic conditions. What would you say is the kind of general demographic or general profile for one of your patients?
I mean, I think that, and we might be a little bit different, but our average patient's age is probably in his early 50s. And I say our average patient would be a 50-year-old guy. But in fairness, there are some things about our practice demographics that are probably surprising. We've got 54% men, 46% women, so that's a little unusual. In general, for most primary care practices, women are more engaged than men are. We have more patients under the age of 21 than over the age of 65. So that would be, I think, probably counterintuitive. A lot of people would think that a practice like ours would cater mainly to folks who are older with chronic medical conditions, and we certainly have those. But what we found initially, our very first target audience were people who were very busy and were very engaged and proactive in their health. So folks that wanted to not let chronic conditions go untreated, but whose schedules were such that it was literally impossible for them to schedule a physical 3 months out with their regular doctor because they didn't know, what their schedule was going to be in 3 months because they might be on a plane or on a business trip or what have you. We got that target demographic of 45 to 65-year-olds, men and women, and then we got their parents, their kids, and now their kids' kids. And so we have some families where we're taking care of 4 generations of the same family. But it would probably be correct in saying that usually that sweet spot is the person who is still working, who is very busy, who has the means to afford a practice like this, but who does not have the time to squander 4 hours waiting in a physician's office for a doc who may or may not give them 5 minutes of their time.
And so that was who you specifically went out and targeted then. You were looking for, with your messaging and your marketing and how you were approaching the practice, those, like you said, 45 to 65-year-old, very busy.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We would go and talk to business groups in town. There's YPO groups, Young President Organization groups here in Indianapolis that we would talk in front of. We got in with the investment community and had them, the financial advisors get us in front of their clients. Insurance brokers are a useful group of folks to know and to get in front of, especially if they're selling life insurance and things like that. They know whether their clients are concerned about their health or dealing with health issues. Is this something that's a problem for them? Getting in front of a group of the insurance brokers' clients who they know is interesting, who are interested in this sort of thing, and putting together a presentation when we were getting started was very beneficial. I will say that I think that your listeners should take with a grain of salt what I'm saying about getting a practice like this started, because it was 12 years ago. And things are different now. I think that now it would be very difficult to understate the importance of your presence online. What does your website look like? How are you linked to other websites? Where do you fall when somebody Googles concierge medicine or private medicine in your town?
Yeah, so are there any specific internet online things you're doing with your presence that have been particularly successful?
There's no silver bullet to this. You just need to work on it, and you need to have it in the forefront. So, we actually hired a company, an advertising company, to coordinate our market outreach, and part of that was to manage our website search engine optimization and to make sure And, anybody who's listening out there, if you type in Concierge Medicine Indianapolis, Priority Physicians will be number one. And it has been for the last 5 years. I'm not saying that you have to be number one on there, but my gosh, you can't be on the second or third page or nobody will ever call you. So, there's a lot of little tricks, and I don't by any means pretend to be an expert on this, but getting interviews in local papers and then linking your website to that. One of the big metrics that Google uses to move you up or down on that is how many other websites is your website linked to. And they have to be valid websites. They can't be, other websites that you write, but if you get in your local business journal, put the article in there and link it to that journal. If you get in the local paper, link it to that. If you have a speaking engagement, link it to that. If you're a member of a certain medical organization, link it to that. All those sorts of things help move you up. Not that there aren't a few tricks of the trade that I'm sure, an advertising company can impart to you and your listeners, but really the first and foremost, it has to be a priority for your business to make sure that you're managing your online presence. And it goes beyond search engine optimization. Even if you're number one on there, if somebody clicks on your website and nobody's touched your website in 5 years and it's out of date and, looks dumpy and half your staff isn't there anymore and, you've hired a new doctor, but she's not on there, that's not good either. So I think that having a company culture which states it's that you never get a second chance to make a first impression, so many times now your company's first impression is made without you even being in the room, and it's made online, and spending some money and spending some time making sure that your online presence is representative of who you are and what your company is trying to do is extremely important. I cannot overstate how important that has been for us.
So my background is actually digital marketing and websites, and so I'm certainly an evangelist of all that too. And I think my experience has very much echoed what you've said. I've gone in and worked with traditional brick and mortar businesses and seen other people do it the same and make a huge impact over the course of time. And I think time being a critical variable, it's, taken a year or two for a lot of people I've worked with or worked with other people. One thing I will say, having worked in that industry though, is there's kind of a huge variance in terms of quality. Do you have any recommendations in terms of what to look for if someone wants to work with an online advertising or marketing agency, and also what you think reasonable expectations are in terms of budget or pricing?
Yeah, I think that finding a local marketing firm who isn't going to look at your small account and poo-poo it is important. There are local marketing agencies that if you don't have $1 million a year to spend, they don't want to have anything to do with you. So, and you know what? You don't want to have anything to do with them because you're going to be such small potatoes that they're not really going to work for you. So, I think that hiring a smaller local firm who is, if you say, here, my budget's $25,000 or $40,000 or whatever it is, they're not going to look at that and say, well, this isn't worth our time. So that's the first thing. And not to say that there aren't practices out there that don't have marketing budgets that are gigantic, but we're a fairly successful private medicine practice. And, the most we've ever spent on advertising is $50,000-$60,000 a year. I'd like to spend more, but, at a certain point, it's all about your return on investment. That's the first thing. And I think that I can't tell somebody what they should or shouldn't spend on advertising. If you're just starting out, it might be that $5,000 is all you can possibly swing in the first couple years. I would say that we have learned some pretty valuable lessons on where that money is best spent and where that money is sort of maybe a hope and a prayer on, whether it's going to make a return on your investment. Again, not to sound like a broken record, but I think any money that's spent on either your website or on your online presence or search engine optimization is money that is extraordinarily well spent. And if I had $5,000, I'd dump it into my website. Things that we have not had a particularly good return on, print advertising really is pretty worthless. The biggest thing is that not a lot of people read, actual newspapers anymore. And those that do, you're going to need a giant full page ad every day for a month in order to get that point across, and people understand that, it's an ad and usually blow right over that. We've had some good success with local public radio, not so much to get our whole business plan out, but just for name recognition. So sponsoring 15-second blurbs where the guy who's reading the news says, brought to you by Priority Physicians, that has been helpful. People don't tune out because they're listening to the news and it's the same guy's voice that, every morning is reading your name, and just like a one sentence about, what you do. We've found some positive reinforcement on that. I think one of the best things, and it's great because it's free, is reaching out to local news media outlets. Finding the beat reporter in your local business journal that writes about health and healthcare, calling them up and saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's how it's different. Would you be interested in writing an article about that? It's free advertising. It takes, an hour of your time, and as long as you're prepared and what you say makes sense and doesn't make you look bad, you might end up with a full-page article in a local paper. That's something that would be fantastic advertising. One of our first big breaks, and one that netted us a lot of patients, is we ended up with an article on the front page of the Sunday newspaper here in town, the Indianapolis Star on Sunday. And that was back in 2005. And the next Monday we had 15 people calling us, wanting to get in. People absolutely read articles, but when it comes to sticking an ad in a newspaper or in a magazine, I can't say I've ever had somebody who signed up that said, yeah, I saw your ad in this article, or I saw your ad in this newspaper. That's not really happened. And you're in digital media, you probably also know that those tend to be pretty darn expensive. It can cost you several $1,000s to be in one magazine one time. So I think that for one just basic bit of advertising advice that I would give to people starting out is online presence is more important. It's becoming more and more important every year because the people who don't know how to use the internet are getting older, and there's more and more of the people that are in your ideal patient demographic have grown up with the internet, and it is their first, second, and third source of information, and that's they're going to go to that every time before they go looking through a newspaper trying to find a private medicine or a direct primary care doc.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I hadn't thought about it in this specific context. I have a friend that's a writer for Forbes, and she was talking to me about this. And it's amazing how starved for information and for expert opinions that those kind of publications are, even like a Forbes. And so I've had lots of friends get featured in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times just by being an expert in some field, obviously like a physician, and just getting in touch with a reporter that covers that and saying, hey, I have 20 years of experience in this field. I'd be happy to, talk to you for an hour for your story you're working on.
Yeah. And even if they're not working on a story now, if they hit a dry spell 2 months from now, they might think, hey, I've still got that guy's contact information, and I think I'll give him a call. It sounds self-serving to do that, but it's really not. These people have a job to do as well, and it's not like healthcare is not on the mind of just about everyone in the country. It's not a hard sell to talk about it, and there's so many different angles and so many different things to talk about. Not the least of which is your local community wherever you happen to be. So even if you're opening the same type of practice that 100 people have already opened before you, if you're the first person who's ever done it in your town, then that's news. And I'm sure the local reporter, whomever that might be, would be willing to talk to you about it. And it's free advertising, and it's advertising in a way that allows you to tell your story. It's not just an ad that's in a paper somewhere.
Yeah, you actually get to connect with people because they get some background about you instead of just your headline.
Exactly. Well, and furthermore, it feels more real. Sure. Because it's people realize that if it's an ad, it's something that you wrote, and if it's an article, it's something that somebody else wrote. And so, at the very least, you have to make a good impression on the person who wrote the article, or they're not going to write nice things about you. And you could be the worst person in the world, but if you're paying for the ad, you can say whatever you want. There's absolutely, whether it's objective or not, in truth, people people tend to put more weight behind an article that's written by somebody else that, touts your new practice and says you're a good guy. That's going to go further than an ad that you paid for in some print publication.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of social proof. At least one person liked me enough to write this nice article.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
Talking about healthcare being on everyone's mind and obviously the Affordable Care Act, what is kind of the role you see of the AAPP and kind of the future of private medicine, concierge medicine, direct pay medicine? How does the AAPP want to play into that?
The AAPP is an organization whose main focus is to be a clearinghouse for all types of practices, medical practices, where the physician has a direct financial relationship with the patient. People will call it concierge medicine, people will call it private medicine, people call it direct primary care. The difference is strictly semantics when you talk about those three terms that I just threw out there. It is price point is what it is. But when it comes right down to it, whether you're a direct primary care doc, private medicine doc, concierge medicine doc, whatever you want to call yourself, you're entering into a contractual relationship with the patient that says, you pay me X and I'll provide you Y. The thing that every one of those things, those types of practice has in common is they say, and by the way, we're going to take the insurance company and we're going to move them out of the equation. We want and are striving to be the voice, the mouthpiece for all types of direct care practices, all types of practices that contract directly with the patient. Many of the things that the practices across the country struggle with, they're the same things that normal businesses struggle with, just with a slightly different twist. So, how do you advertise for this? Many physicians who practiced in a traditional model have absolutely no idea how to advertise. They sign up for Anthem, and Anthem sends them patients. Somebody needs to see a primary care doctor, and Anthem sends them a list of people they can see, and you don't need to, before you know it, you've got a waiting list, and there's never been an issue with getting patients in the door. So that's a new thing that many of our physician members come to us with. How do I start a practice? And we've got, hundreds of docs who've done it before, and you can sit there and at the conferences and pick their brain about how do they do it. How do you advertise? How do you grow your practice? Another huge thing that the AAPP is very focused on. One other thing that we have spent an awful lot of time on over the last couple of years is making sure that all of our members are in regulatory compliance with both state and federal laws. And those laws change, on a yearly basis, making sure that you're not doing something inadvertently illegal, and billing Medicare and billing the patient or something like that. And it sounds silly, but this whole thing is so new that, especially in the beginning, there were a lot of doctors who were doing things that maybe not overtly illegal, but not technically legal, and they had no idea. And so that's something that the AAPP has really been focusing on, which is making sure that we bring in healthcare lawyers that are experts in the field of regulatory compliance to make sure that our members, whether they've been practicing for 10 years or whether they're thinking about setting up a practice, making sure that they have access to those legal minds who can say, okay, this is where you're practicing, this is how you want to set this thing up. Here's, 10 things that you have to make sure you're doing right so you don't run afoul with the law accidentally. Some of the other things that we really want to focus on, as private medicine docs and being able to spend more time with our patients, inherently many of our members are more focused on preventative medicine. So not being reactionary, but being able to spend time on prevention. What does that look like? Can you bring new technologies, new lab tests to bear, to tease out diabetes 5 years before, a regular doc is going to find it, who's not checking for, fasting insulin levels and things like that. How do you bring technology to bear to take care of your patients via video conferencing or mobile telemetry, being able to have access to your electronic medical record anywhere through a patient portal, the doctors having access to the patient's medical record when they're on call so they can make accurate and timely diagnoses. So many things that a physician in a regular 9-to-5 practice doesn't necessarily have to worry about are things that our association focuses on.
It hadn't really occurred to me until you were just talking, and it kind of crystallized in my mind, but it is very much this desire to practice preventative medicine from everyone I've talked to that's driven them into private medicine or concierge medicine or direct primary care or whatever you want to call it, that many of them were in a situation where they knew that was the right thing to do. And because of the structure of the system, because they only had 7.5 minutes to be with their patients, they just couldn't do it.
Right.
They didn't have the time and the resources.
It's sad now. I still have many friends who practice in the traditional manner, and they don't want to practice the way they are. These are constraints that are being placed on them by either the insurance companies or by the hospital system who owns their practice and sets production levels for them. So, you're absolutely 100% correct. If you have 7 minutes to spend with your patient, I don't care if you're the best primary care doctor in the world. If it is a complicated patient, there's going to be things that don't get discussed, period. There's just no way. You cannot get through everything on a patient who has multiple medical problems in 7 minutes. And so, that visit turns into, what's the one thing you want to talk about today, Mrs. Smith? And we'll address that. And if you want to talk about, your next problem, then you need to make another appointment. And, oh, by the way, my next available for that is 2 months from now. It's not just that docs like practicing this way better. It's that patients really feel that their concerns are being heard. And, in the beginning, that was sort of our sales pitch, that doctors like practicing this way better and patients like going to physicians who practice this way better. It's more than that now. I mean, we have data, and the direct primary care docs have been fantastic in collecting this data that shows that physicians that practice this way get better outcomes. I mean, it's not just that the patients like it better, it's that the patients are healthier, go to the emergency room less, are hospitalized less, and their chronic diseases are managed in a much more efficient and proper manner, which tends to make sense, and it has nothing to do with us being better doctors. But if you take the same doc and you give him 3 or 4 times as much time with the patient, he's going to be able to do a better job.
Well, given all those things, that patients like it better, doctors like it better, and the outcomes are better, and now there's increasingly more and more data to support that, what do you think in the next 3 to 5 years with the Affordable Care Act and some of the other changes that'll happen, what's it going to look like? Are a majority of primary care physicians, you think, going to be doing a direct pay or a private model, or how will it shape up?
Well, I wish I knew. I think that there are a couple things that are really driving docs to switch over to direct primary care and private medicine, and patients to want that. And the first is that the Affordable Care Act basically says you need to have insurance. You can debate back and forth, and people will, whether or not that's right or fair. I happen to think that, if you live here, it's probably a reasonable expectation that you have at least catastrophic insurance. But what a lot of folks are doing is there's been a big trend towards having healthcare savings accounts and flexible spending accounts set up, whether it's through their work or on their own, and then they buy a high deductible policy. So you have somebody who has a $5,000 deductible or a $10,000 deductible and a healthcare savings account, and they very quickly realize that money and that HSA is their money. It's not some nebulous, benefit that they're getting through their employer that's administered through Anthem. And when it's your money and you're swiping your HSA card through something to pay for a medical service, people start to become, I think, better consumers of medical care and start to say, I had a good experience and I'm going to go back and see that doctor, or I paid that doctor X amount of money and he made me wait for 4 hours and didn't call me back when I needed to talk to him, and I'm not going to go see that guy anymore. And I'm not sure that that's a bad thing. I think that bringing a little more consumerism, a little more, a regular business practice to something that is 18% of our GDP is not a bad thing. The physician practices who are responsive to their patients, have good customer service, and take good care of their patients will expand, and the ones who don't will fail. And that's to say nothing of the fact that I personally think that allowing primary care doctors to practice in this way will reverse the trend of docs running away from primary care when it comes to picking their residency after they go to medical school. It has been a very tough sell to medical students to say, hey, you really should do this residency. It's basically the same amount of time as everyone else is spending in their residency, and when you're done, you're going to make half as much money, and you're going to spend 7 minutes with 45 patients a day. Boy, and you're going to do a lot of paperwork, and you're going to be beat by the end of the day. And people say, well, I'm just going to be a radiologist, you know? And so that, in going around and talking to a lot of residency groups, and I have been over the last year or so, especially since I become the president of the AAPP, I mean, these guys are excited about this. You know, they are very excited about the prospect of being able to take care of patients and put their patients first, not have insurance companies, you know, dictate how many folks they need to see a day, or, you know, what they can or can't do for their patients. Just, you know, it's just a direct relationship with the patient. What we have always been telling our patients is, in this model, the physician and the patient's interests are aligned. You pay me to take good care of you, and that's what I do. And if I can take good care of you over the phone, great. You know, in a regular physician practice, if somebody sends the doc an email or calls them on the phone, they're not going to get paid for that. And so they're absolutely incentivized to get that patient in the door so they can bill them for the encounter. And that is something that in direct primary care, private medicine, we don't do that. You know, if it can be handled over the phone, if it can be handled via email, great. If the patient wants to come in, fine. If the patient needs to come in, we'll tell them they need to come in. But there's no perverse incentive to wait until the patient's sicker. There's no perverse incentive to, you know, where you can take care of somebody for their entire life for their heart failure and make more money in an afternoon putting a stent in them than you would in their entire life managing them medically. You know, that's crazy that that's the system that we've set up, but that's the system that we've set up. And not only is it bad for patient outcomes, but physicians don't like practicing that way. They know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in so many cases. But the way the insurance companies have set up the system for payment, at least in primary care, it goes totally against that.
It is amazing how just changing those incentives and how the system is set up dramatically changes the way everything functions. Like you said, people are paying you for outcomes. And if you can make them healthy and feeling good over email on the phone, you know, like, who cares? Like, why would they come in? Like, they have better things to do on a Tuesday afternoon.
Absolutely. You know, I once heard a direct primary care colleague of mine named Bryan Forest talk, and somebody said, well, I don't even see how you can possibly afford to take care of somebody for $50 a month. And he said, well, that's because the average person doesn't understand where the money in medicine goes. You know, people think that their insurance goes up and healthcare costs go up, and that the doctors are just dancing to the bank with, you know, making $3 million a year. And what they don't understand, especially in primary care, is about 60 cents of every primary care dollar is wasted. 40 cents of it goes to run the insurance company or to pay the insurance company to tell the patient that they can't go see the doctor, you know, basically to just make things difficult to get in to see or to deny claims. And then 20% of that money is the physician's office staff, where they're just paid to try and get the doctor paid for things that he's already done. Okay? And so you end up with just a tremendous amount of waste. And what Bryan said, he said, you know, show me another business where 60% of the operating costs of the business is just complete waste. You know, I mean, it's just, and I'll show you a business that is out of business. But in this country, it's just been accepted as the norm. Well, you know, we're going to waste 60 cents for every primary care dollar that we spend, which is crazy. So, you know, you end up with a situation where you can literally cut the primary care costs in half and still make 10% more than you were making before by removing the insurance company. Because now the doctor doesn't need to have 5 people sitting in the back trying to get Anthem to pay them. Anthem doesn't need to be skimming 40% off of each dollar that you're spending to pay for your primary care, and everybody's happier. And I'm not an insurance company exec, but I even got to think that maybe the insurance companies would be happy to not be dealing with $15 claims for, earwax removal. That's not, they might even look at it and go, gosh, that's not really why we got into the insurance business to begin with either. It's definitely a win for employers. It's a win for patients. It's a win for doctors, and probably a net neutral for insurance companies.
I actually heard Dr. Forest speak at a conference about a month ago, and he had a slide. I think it was like direct primary care math. And he was like, I had to put this in a slide because people are so incredulous. Every time I tell them, take off the percentage for collections, take off the percentage for overhead. And like you said, 60% of the top line is going to nothing. It's going to this kind of inefficiency. And he's actually going to be the next interview on the show after you. So if you're listening to this episode and you want to know more, I will talk to Dr. Bryan Forest about that on the next call.
He's definitely an episode worth listening to.
There you go. He was a good speaker, so I expect he will be. So I have two last questions I wanted to run by you. I know we're running short on time here. Are there any specific tools, EMR, billing, anything like that you use in your practice that you're happy with, you would recommend?
Well, I think that that's obviously two separate questions. From a billing standpoint, the one thing I would say is that we have made billing as simple as humanly possible, and we bill our patients once a year. And so we don't really have any billing problems. So, it quite frankly is our patients get a statement either through the mail or electronically, however they want, once a year, and then they pay us. Bryan would be a great person to ask. Many of his patients pay monthly, and it's either an automatic deduction from their credit card or straight out of their bank account, and he's got some great systems set up for his patients to do that. But because of, we charge just an annual fee, we really don't have any issues with billing. It's, we know who's paid and we know who hasn't. Not an issue. We use an EMR called Soapware. And it is a basic EMR platform, but one that we feel, certainly for the price has worked well for us. If you get 10 docs in a room, they're probably going to have 10 different opinions on electronic medical records. I think that the one thing I would say, just an overall general statement, there are a lot of EMRs out there that are designed specifically for large systems to make sure that they maximize insurance company and government payments to the doc. So, check 8 boxes and you can bill a 99213 and make another $20. And it'll make all sorts of flashing and warnings if you haven't checked enough boxes. Hey, are you sure you don't want to fill out 2 more systems reviews so you can, bump this up to the next level of billing? That's great if that's the type of practice you're in, but that's obviously not something that's needed for direct primary care or private medicine practices. So I would encourage folks in private medicine to look at what you really need in an EMR. And I think what you need is versatility. In primary care, one of 10,000 things or more could walk through the door. So pick an EMR that's easy to use. Pick an EMR that gives you mobile applications so that you can, access it from home and you don't have to run back to the office when you need to look at a patient chart. Pick an EMR that has a patient portal so patients can get on and look at their own medical records. That's a big thing. And pick an EMR that's cost effective for your business. And we've all dealt with hospital systems that spend $1 million on an electronic medical record. That's obviously not something that most private medicine docs are going to be able to swing. So there are a lot of EMRs out there. It's something that through the AAPP we certainly help set prospective docs up with EMR companies that we've worked with at our conferences that we have twice a year. We have electronic medical record companies that have been successful in the private medicine world. They're representing themselves that you can talk to. So that would just kind of be my 2 cents on EMRs. Don't overspend on them. There's a lot of fairly simple, bare bones EMRs that work just fine for a private medicine practice because you're not really caring about the billing component of it.
Yeah, that's always been my general experience with technology, that the more features you add in there, it creates more hassles than it does solving problems.
If you had the billing software, if that was part of your software, no matter what, you're paying for something you'll never use, which is never a good thing.
Sure. Well, so one last question for you here, Dr. Priddy. Knowing what you know now and your experience, if you could only say one thing to a physician considering transitioning or in the process of transitioning, what piece of advice would you give them?
Well, the advice I would give them is go for it. Don't do it blindly. Talk to folks who've done it before. If you've never, been to an AAPP meeting, it's probably the best $500 you'll ever spend in being around several hundred, doctors and lawyers who have a lot of experience with that. But I would never discourage anybody from making the leap over to this. I think it's the best career decision I could have ever made. All my partners would agree 100% with me that they could not imagine practicing any other way. And that's the same thing I hear from every other doc at our annual meetings who practices this way. They just cannot imagine going back to practicing the way they had. So I know it's scary, and there's always that prospect of switching over to something that is a unknown, but there's thousands of physicians who have done it and done it successfully. So there's really, if you're listening out there and you're thinking about it, there's no reason why you couldn't be the next one.
And do you have I think it's in October, but the date and time for the next AAPP conference?
Yes, that's correct. So the next AAPP conference is in October. It's in Miami, and the dates are Friday, October 10th, and Saturday, October 11th. And it's at the Fontainebleau in Miami South Beach. And if anyone wants more information on that, the website is aapp.org.
Okay, we will put a link to that in the show notes on conciergemedicineradio.com when this goes live so everyone can find it.
That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dr. Priddy. It was good talking with you. If someone wants to get in touch with you or has any more questions about the AAPP, where's the best place for them to do that?
The best thing to do would be to get on the AAPP website, and there's a Contact Us button, and just address it to me, and they will forward the email over to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priddy. We had a good time talking with you. Everyone else, thank you for listening. We will be back with you next week.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey guys, this is your host, Taylor Pearson. To give you a little background on the show, after seeing my dad and sister, both physicians, struggle to find a good resource for how to transition from their traditional practices, I launched Concierge Medicine Radio to create a resource to help physicians and healthcare professionals launch, run, and grow patient-centered direct pay or concierge practices. If you enjoy the show and want to help us spread the word to other physicians and healthcare professionals, it really helps us out if you'll leave a review on iTunes. I know the iTunes interface is a little clunky to say the least, so we put together a quick guide on how you can leave us a review at conciergemedicineradio.com/review, or you can go to conciergemedicineradio.com and click spread the word.
Thanks for joining us today at Concierge Medicine Radio. If you found today's show valuable, we'd love it if you spread the word by leaving us a review on iTunes or sharing it with your friends. To see notes on today's show, please visit us at conciergemedicineradio.com. While you're there, leave us your email to hear about all upcoming episodes.